Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Morning Devo with Bo. It is December 20th, 2021. Getting certainly close to the Christmas day and excited to be in the Word with you. We'll see how far we get today. We might get into chapter 37 of Genesis, but we're going to start off in 36. And you might go, Bo, why are you going to be in Genesis 36? It seems like just a big, long genealogy. Well, it is, and I tend to really dig these areas. There's a lot to learn in these genealogies, and I know sometimes it seems so boring to go over one, but I find it's just a neat in a Devo kind of style. You can even pull out some stuff and kind of contemplate and think through, and in our devotional walk with God, we have to believe that everything God has included in His Word has got to be pretty important, and things that we can learn from, and and I believe so even here in Genesis 36. So hey, I hope you're warming up and you're getting ready for the holiday, and especially just as we approach, let's be in prayer for one another. It's always a beautiful time, the holiday, but it's always a tough time too for a lot of people. So we want to be in prayer for one another and just coming alongside each other and lifting one another up as the holidays here approach and the new year gets underway. So let's get going here. And whoop, I just shut me off. Sorry about that. So Genesis 36. You can always check out the archives of the devotions at my YouTube channel, Bo Willette. Okay, here we go. So we just got done this incredible move from Jacob back to the promised land. And it was told that one of his eldest, or his firstborn son, was having intimacy with one of his wives. Yeah. So, and then we get into this genealogy of Esau. Here is a list of the descendants of Esau, also called Edom. Now, it's an important little part right there, the Edom part, that also called Edom. Esau is related or called Edom. So when we get through the Bible and we read about the Edomites, the land of Edom, it should tip us off that that's talking about Esau, or the descendants of Esau. Even if I read the last part of this chapter, chapter 36, it says, "These then are the names of the sub-tribes of Edom, which given its name to the area it occupied. All were Edomites, descendants of Esau." So it makes it really clear that everybody that is listed here is a descendant of Esau and a Edomite. And this is interesting because just as we saw already in the biblical narrative that there were kind of the son that is of the promise, and then you have another son. So, for instance, Abraham and Sarah, they had, of course, we're familiar with Isaac, the one that God said, hey, lay down your son, your only son Isaac. We know that narrative. We went through that. But remember, he had his firstborn was from his maid, Hagar, and the kid's name was Ishmael. And Ishmael was promised descendants and kind of a prosperous progeny as well. And he had 12. There was 12 princes of Ishmael. And to study the descendants of Ishmael, you realize that boy, there's a lot of Israel's battles have been with these tribes that the Bible said we're going to be at war with one another. So the Bible prophesied that Ishmael, his descendants, would be kind of at war with Isaac. And then you see that that's what happens. And here we see there's Jacob's 12 kids, and they're not the greatest. And then we have Esau, and we're going to see his kids. And they're going to have kids, and everybody's going to be, then Jacob's kids are going to be warring with Esau's kids. And it's kind of interesting, but I just think like, how this applies is that, man, there's our relationships that we have, man, they can really have some ramifications. And I hope you see that God help us in our relational lives, because they do impact the world, and they impact countries. And so here we read, here's a list of the descendants of Esau. Esau's descendants are still living. How many of them? Who knows? I wonder how many are there. Can anybody really trace that? I wonder. I want to. Hey, comment corner. Off topic. You enjoyed the music yesterday. Thank you. Hey, no problem. It is my blessing to have a wonderful time at church and playing some music, and that was great, and just worshiping alongside with the church, and great musicians in the body, so it's fun to play. Thank you so much for the encouragement. So Esau married 3 local girls from Canaan. Remember Esau's heart? A very rebellious heart. He didn't want to marry any of the women that were from the area of Abraham and Sarah. And it's interesting, Esau marries women from the land of Canaan, and Jacob had to go outside of the area known as Israel today to find, right, to go to his mom and dad's hometown to find a wife. And Esau marries women from that were in tribal groups in the area known as Israel, and he marries 3 local girls from Canaan, and they're named. And I just think this is so fascinating that these women are named. Ada, daughter of Elon the Hethite. Oholibamah, which sounds a lot if you have ever read the book of Ezekiel 23. There's a name that sounds a lot like this. Oholibamah, daughter of Anah and granddaughter of Zibeon the Hivite. Basemath, his cousin, she was a daughter of Ishmael, the sister of Nebaioth. What a cool name. So check this out. Esau marries these 3 local girls from Canaan. One of them, his cousin, who is a offspring of Ishmael, and from Abraham Sarah fame. And Esau and it says, and Ada had a son, Eliphaz. Esau and Basemath had a son named Reuel. Esau and Oholibamah had sons named, and they named them Korah, Jalem, Jeush. And these sons were born to Esau in the land of Canaan. Isn't that interesting? Esau, here this land is promised to Jacob, and yet Jacob goes outside the land to get his spouse, and Esau in rebellion stays in to get wives that are in the land of Israel, but they're given over, of course, to false idols, distortions, of God at this time, and that's what was in the land. And so Esau had that heart, of rebellion. For Jacob, Jacob had to travel hundreds of miles to go and find his parents' uh, family. Hundreds of miles, the difficulty, right? Following God sometimes is not easy. There can be some trials along the way. It can be a long journey, right? Where Esau, we see him, man, he just looked right next door. He just went like boom, and sometimes it's that it's that quick, wanting something quick. Wanting something quick, and not going through the difficulty that I need to go through. Right? Esau was that guy who didn't want to go through the trial, didn't want to go through the traveling, um, didn't have a heart, didn't see the importance of listening to the father, right? Didn't see the importance of listening to the mother. Oh, mom, oh, dad, man, you guys don't know what you're talking about. Why would I travel 500 miles to go see my family, my cousins, and find a spouse? Why would I do that? I can just do what I think is right. And what I think is right is doing this. You get an idea that Esau was one of those people who, when it says honor your mom and dad, Esau just wasn't that person. And neither have I been that person in life. When I think of, honoring your mom and dad, have I done that perfectly? Not even close, right? God help me though nowadays to honor my mom and dad. Love does not dishonor, and help me not to dishonor. Um, this is where Esau was not loving at all. Um, he was a guy who really dishonored his family in these ways. And it had incredible ramifications all the way up to Jesus' time for sure, right? There was someone ruling over the area in Judea. And these guys, the Herodian dynasty, you might have heard of King Herod. Well, when Jesus was born, what did the King Herod do at that point? Well, he heard about the King of the Jews being born, and he puts out an edict to literally exterminate every male child 2 years and younger in the land. Can you imagine the tragedy there? The incredible hardship that takes place. Well, King Herod comes from this line, and so you could see that this battle between, in a sense, Esau's family line and Jacob's family line just continues and continues, and hard hearts and bitterness and wrath, everything just continues and keeps going. So even though we saw already in the narrative that Esau, man, loved Jacob, he ends up loving Jacob, and we saw a wonderful reconciliation of Esau, but we see that the descendants aren't going to do so well. We know Jacob's descendants are rough peeps for sure, and we know Esau's are too. So, you could go through this list and read through it if you want on your own time, and go through all the tribes and the family lines of Esau. And there's some really important names here, ones that, will come up again in our Bible study. So, you definitely don't want to ever throw away these areas. This is a very cool historical record, and very ancient one, and has a very important part in the biblical narrative of the battles that will take place, all the warring that will go on, families going at one another. It's always a civil war in Israel, it seems like, right? Always battling. Some families are like that. Some of our own families are like that. And the holidays can really be an interesting time because they can be an awkward time where you have your families just constantly battling against one another. That might be your situation, this Christmas. You might find kind of the Jacob Esau kind of situation happening. You might find that your descendants and their descendants don't get along. Some families are big and they have a lot of kids, a lot of cousins, and sometimes those cousins get in fights and sometimes they war with one another, and sometimes you see kind of what happens in our lives as we get older and have children and have grandchildren and things like that, and we see there's sometimes it creates some problems, especially if things aren't resolved well. Esau has gone away from Jacob. They've kind of separated. Jacob has now stayed in the land, and Esau has moved. And he's moved far away. And so I don't know how much Esau and Jacob have talked since the time that they kind of reconciled along the road there in the travels. But sometimes our families aren't like that, where they're not reconciled either. It's always good to try to reconcile as best as we can in our families, especially, the sooner the better. Whatever it takes. Jesus said, "Hey, before you, go sacrifice your offering on the altar, go and get right with your brother." Go and try to reconcile. Go deal with what you need to deal with. An act of worshiping God is an act of reconciling with people. That is a act of worshiping God. And so that's right living for sure. Okay, so now we go into 37. And it says, "So Jacob settled again in the land of Canaan." Okay, so we see Esau, like I say, he goes to a land that ends up being called Edom, and you might have heard of Petra, the city of Petra. That's in Edom. And so Jacob, though, settles in the land of Canaan, in the land of what's known as Israel. And it says there where his father had lived, and Jacob's son Joseph was now 17 years old. So Joseph is the firstborn of Rebekah, the wife that he loved a ton. And his job, along with his half-brothers, the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah, was to shepherd his father's flocks. But Joseph reported to his father some of the bad things they were doing. And it says, "Now it happened, Israel loved Joseph more than any of his children." Remember, Israel is now the new name of Jacob. So you're going to see it kind of switch over here. Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other children, because Joseph was born to him in his old age. So one day Jacob gave him a special gift, a brightly covered coat. His brothers, of course, noticed their father's partiality and consequently hated Joseph. So sad, right? Israel loves Joseph. Joseph is the firstborn of Rebekah and has a special place in Israel's eyes. And it might have been the eyes of Joseph, for all we know, meaning Joseph might have had some eyes that looked like Rebekah, reminded him of Rebekah, and went, "Man, she's so awesome. She was so cool, and man, how cool she was." And Joseph looks just like her, man. Who knows? But anyway, he was special, this kid. 17 years old, 17, you're kind of young, you're figuring it out. You think you know something, but you probably don't know much. And I can remember my 17th birthday. Can you? I don't know if you can. I can. I can remember my 17th birthday. It says his brothers, of course, noticed the father's partiality. And notice what happens. Okay? They notice the father's partiality, maybe the good treatment that has been given to Joseph. And something stirs up in their heart. Sometimes we see someone being treated a different way, maybe more kindly. Maybe hardship hasn't fallen on them so much. Maybe they seem to have a more privileged position. Something can stir up in our hearts very easy. And coming from my background, I was, in that Southern California world, I was kind of really conditioned in my mind to really hate certain people, like not like privileged people. People that lived up in the hills, people that had nice two-story homes, people that, you know, had big houses, people that had nice cars, people that, seemed to have it all together, people that seemed to go to church and be all happy and all that stuff. In my mind growing up, I was always just like, man, those are the oppressive people. Those are the people that are oppressing everyone. Those are the oppressors. Sorry, they're not the oppressed, they're the oppressors. And you start getting this chip on your shoulder, and you're like, those are the people that just, they rob everybody. They're the ones that are stealing. There's the one, charging high interest on everybody. And you kind of get into this mode where all of a sudden you become envious, and your heart is bitter because you see, that they're prospering. And it gets evil quick, man. Where all of a sudden you look back on, what you think, and you go, man, I can't believe how bitter I am. And it's funny because it's like that stuff don't go away easy. That does not go away from me in an easy way. I have to be very aware of it because it comes back super easy for me. And that's just because of my background. It's just because of my education, just how I thought as a kid, the different things that were a part of my life that really taught and educated me. And so here you have the brothers that are there with the father. They still are a part of the father's world, and yet they become bitter at the goodness of the father towards Joseph. Now, does that sound like a story in the New Testament or what? Has anybody read the parable of the prodigal son? Which I don't know if it's a parable. The prodigal son could be a true story for all we know. But if you have the prodigal son, it's very similar, right? You have a brother who's there by the father who turns bitter. Why? Because the father loves the other son. It's not that the father didn't love the son that stayed, but there was an envy in the son that stays his heart because of the wonderful love that someone has towards another person. And sometimes we could interpret that love that people have for other people as, that they are privileged, or they are this, or they are that. But I just got to ask myself a question all the time, and that is it producing the righteousness of God in me, the way I'm thinking? Or is it producing just evil acts, hatred, bitterness, envy, strife, all that stuff? And so it's important for us to think about that. His brothers noticed their father's partiality, that he loved Joseph, and it says that they couldn't say a kind word to him, right? They hated Joseph. So something's happening. And these bros, by the way, they were some vicious dudes. Remember, these guys wiped out a whole town. These guys were not gentle giants. These people were could be quite violent, and that's an understatement, a very big understatement. If anybody I knew was like some of these guys who wrecked a whole town, by killing them. I don't know if I'd be wanting to hang out with someone like that, but that would be pretty intense. But that's how his bros were, and so this is definitely a sketchy situation. And then it says one night, and it goes through this 17-year-old's dream and his dreams. And notice how the 17-year-old reacts. I kind of dig this. He says one night Joseph had dreams and promptly reported the details to his brothers, causing even deeper hatred. Man, why did you tell your bros? It says, listen to this, he proudly announced. We were out in the field binding sheaves, and my sheaves stood up, and your sheaves all gathered around it and bowed before it. These sheaves, these bundles of wheat, are all here lined up, right? Your guys' sheaves stood around mine, gathered around it, and they actually bowed to mine. And that didn't probably go over too well. He says, they said, so you want to be our king, do you? His brothers derided, and they hated him both for the dream and for his cocky attitude. And so they look at Joseph and they go, man, this 17-year-old needs to be knocked down a few pegs. Have you ever felt like someone needed to be knocked down a few pegs? Yeah, and they kind of get this attitude. But remember, these dudes' hearts, these brothers' hearts, man, they're already bitter. They're already bummed, man. They're already, they're not doing good. One of them's been sleeping with the dad's wife, and some of them already wrecked some town, and all the people, all the men in the town, they had to move after it because they wrecked the neighborhood. Obviously, they killed all the males. I mean, it was just unreal. And so he says, you want to be our king? And then they say, and he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen to my latest dream, he boasted. The sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed low before me. This time he told his father as well of his brothers. But his father rebuked him. What is this? He asked. Shall I indeed and your mother and your brothers come and bow before you? His brothers were fit to be tied concerning this affair, but his father gave it quite a bit of thought and wondered what it all meant. It's a good passage in the whole dream here because it's a passage that's interpreted or that it helps us interpret a passage in the book of Revelation. So if you've ever studied the last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation, it has this little section in it, which is very cool. But notice how this is working. Joseph is sitting here going, man, I'm having these amazing dreams, and it's all about you guys actually bowing down to me. And it's funny, and instead of them looking at it and going, hey man, cocky teenager, just get away, what should have they done? Well, they should have took heed to what was said. They should have listened to it and listened to kind of what the words meant. That, hey, there's something special in this Joseph. That God's got a plan here. And it might be for us, to submit. But maybe that's what God wants us to do. Notice they weren't in thinking that way. They weren't thinking about, hey, what does God want us to do? Maybe God's in this. Let me discern this. Let's go to God with this. They didn't go that direction. Instead, their hearts were already so bitter and so envious and so jacked at the time. Even Israel's heart doesn't want to listen to it. And he's just like, nah, just a cocky 17-year-old. Look throughout the Bible, and you'll see some young people that God has used powerfully. Jeremiah, Daniel, right here, Joseph. A guy named Jesus, pretty young, and God used him powerfully. So many people. Timothy, a young person. God speaks to young people and he speaks to old people. And, we don't want to be people who just look at a person's age or look at, maybe they are privileged. Maybe they are in a place where they've been, they haven't had to work the field like the other brothers. They've been given a measure of grace. what we call privilege. You know, and maybe that's true, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have something to say. And so, this morning I need to check my heart and make sure that there's not bitterness and envy towards people, so I don't just shut them down and not listen to them at all. God, help me to be in a right place in my heart with human beings, that this bitterness has not taken over this heart, that I will not listen and discern what they're saying. Because boy, what if I miss something that's very important? And I miss it not because it wasn't told to me, but I miss it because my heart was bitter. And how many times maybe am I going to be in a message in the church where I'm going to miss something? I'm going to miss something that's shared. And I'm going to miss it not because it's not said, but I'm going to miss it because my heart is bitter and resentful and yucky. Isn't that weird? How we can miss the message even though the message is right before us. Why? Because our heart is a mess. It's caught up in all these yucky horizontal things instead of looking vertically up at God. Jesus, by the time he was on the scene, the most religious leaders of his day heard everything he said, and yet they got none of it. Isn't that amazing? The most amazing teacher, professor, rabbi, king, prophet is before you, sharing, and yet your heart is so bittered out. Man, you've been drinking, not Gatorade, but Bitterade, and it's so bitter that you cannot listen. You don't even know what Jesus is saying. That's how our hearts can get. God, help us this morning to learn these lessons that, oh man, are here right before us. Help us not walk with this kind of hatred in our heart towards one another, knowing that the hatred in our heart towards one another will not just stay with us, but it'll go down for family upon family upon family, and it just keeps growing, and Lord, help us to learn to teach our descendants, people that come after us, to have a peaceful heart, to have a loving heart towards people, to listen to people. And it's not that we don't critique, it's not that we don't discern, but help us to listen to the message. Let us listen. Help us to be good listeners. Jesus says in the book of Revelation, in his writing to the churches, he says, "He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches." And I always think of that and go, do I have an ear to listen? So important lessons for sure. Let us not despise someone's youth. Let us not walk around someone just because they're young. And let us have good ears to want to hear. So you guys take care. Have a great one, okay? Good start to the week. Bye-bye.